I think I would do it right if I start with the word of thanks to the Center for Refugee Studies for convening this event, for making it possible for some of us who invested considerable part of their lives into what we know as the two Sudans today, trying to address the very complex conflict there, trying to find solutions and facilitate some of those solutions through very comprehensive and continuous involvement of the international community, particularly in the field of humanitarian assistance. In 1993, the United Nations were able to negotiate and sign with the two parties, the government in Khartoum and the SPLM, an agreement which everybody knows as Operation Lifeline Sudan. A lot has been written about this program, and in one sentence I can say that the as it is called, has had a very profound positive impact on the humanitarian situation on the ground. The amount of resources that were invested into addressing various types of humanitarian emergencies, including, as it started with hunger in Darfur, and through the hunger in Bahar Ghazal, when the city of Rumbek was full of dead bodies, literally dozens of thousands of people dying of hunger. They were lying in the street in 97, 98. If not for the assistance delivered through this program, I think the numbers would be much, much larger. So, UN, and that's where I worked for at least 15 years, dealing with Sudan as one of the countries, has been obviously very much in agreement with the concept that peace is better than war. And like Professor Spears said, that it might be questioned whether war is a better way of solving the complex crises, complex conflicts. And I would be unable, of course, to challenge one of his questions within this very short period of time as to what contributed more to the progress of the humankind, the war or peace. Interestingly, and I'm sure he knows as an expert on this matter, that there is no definition of peace in scientific terms, but there is a definition of war, and many of those. And in itself, it tells how profound is this conundrum, this dichotomy of human evolution. We will probably be contributing through our discussion a little bit to the arguments in favor of peace, because what we're talking about, what needs to be done and what practically can be done in order to address the complex humanitarian emergency in the two Sudans. And this is all about peace, as I would imagine. Now, before trying to give you a couple of ideas about what type of peace building and whether peace building is a good answer to the complexity of the crisis in North and South, what used to be the single Sudan, I'd like to make one general remark. I think that the subject matter under discussion, the IDPs and the related challenges in the two Sudans, at the stage that we're discussing it today, needs to be informed by the fact that we are talking about the two states, one of which gained its independence from another only 2 years ago. It's a very important thing that we need always to be aware of. It's a kind of a recognition of separation and at the same time absolutely inseparate existence of the two states. The humanitarian crisis in the former Sudan has left a very deep imprint in the collective memory of the people of different walks, including academics and profoundly so the practitioners who dealt with various aspects of the complex humanitarian emergency and massive human rights violations in the Sudan. So I think that this discussion, which is hosted by the Center for Refugee Studies, is really extremely timely and offers us an opportunity to assess the evolution of the challenges that the IDPs and the refugees continue to face since the end of the civil war, since the end of the implementation of the comprehensive peace agreement, and since the ascension of the South to independence. These events produced, I believe, profound impact on the situation of the ADPs, but unfortunately for them, it did not bring about the change that we were expecting it to deliver. Probably on the contrary, it even led to some trends and some events which actually exacerbated. And again, here we come to what Professor Spears had suggested as what is better, peace or war, and how do we relate, politically to those two things when we are dealing with the humanitarian emergency. The scope and scale of the IDP refugees crisis in the two Sudans has only marginally improved, and it does not show signs of immediate settlement. I think it remains heavily entrenched in both substance and numbers, and this is worrying, I guess, speaking politically. This seems to be one of the reasons of the prevalence of some stereotypes of the humanitarian issues afflicting the two Sudans. The point that I want to stress here is, yes, indeed, most of the traditional triggers and root causes of internal displacement of the population in the north and in the south, they are still in place. And yes, they need to be dealt with in accordance with internationally agreed upon and supported principles and policies. That's why obviously we're here, because we at least as a minimum should be united by our commitment to those principles and policies. At the same time, I think the humanitarian crisis in the two Sudans is the outcome of a very complex and fast-changing new reality in this part of the African continent, because we cannot take the African, the Sudanese emergency out of the context of the whole of Africa. It's just impossible. We cannot disconnect the situation of what's happening in Darfur from what's happening in Chad. Just totally, would be totally scientifically ungrounded. Factually, obviously, more. So I would like also to stress here that we need to see both the North and the South being separate entities today, separate states, in the realistic light, giving it a realistic assessment. I believe that the North is significantly weakened by the secession. It is internally unstable and afflicted with continuing violence across very spacious and strategically critical areas such as Darfur, Blue Nile, South Kordofan, and Abyei. We can also refer to some other potentially very dangerous situations in eastern Sudan, as well as in northern Sudan, particularly related to the construction of the Merowe Dam. So the northern Sudan should be seen also in the light of the fact that its economy, its national pride, if there's such a notion applicable to a nation, is heavily wounded by the secession of the South. Because the North lost human resources and mineral resources, natural resources of the South, which it has been continuously exploiting to the detriment of the population in the South. And because the dependence of the Sudan is seen by many in the North, the mainstream of the Northerners, at least the way I was able to register, as a failure of the political elite, of the Arab political elite in the North, to manage what Professor Deng, speaking at the opening, said, to manage the diversity of the Sudan. It's a fundamental issue. Sudan is not unique in this regard. There were many governments in many other countries where this kind of phenomenon has happened, and what followed was normally a disintegration of the state. The most striking examples of the last 25 years are Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union. And in this regard, Sudan just follows the line. The failure to manage the diversity. And the North, the political elites and the government in the north do not show signs of change of heart in that regard, regarding the sufferings of the millions of their people, internally displaced and refugees, and regarding many other matters that I think need to be addressed in order to change the whole situation in the north. The south, I believe, as far as we can link it with the issue which we are discussing, the main south, is yet to gain strength of an independent, stable, and developing state. It lacks the most significant weakness, in my opinion, if we're talking about policies. It lacks resources for addressing most of the strategic challenges that are generated by the nation building, including the issue of consolidating its control over the entire territory. Considerable parts of the territory of southern Sudan, as well as in the north, as we know, are not actually under the government control, if you think about it in strict political, legal, and constitutional terms. Of course, in the south it's less prominent, but still it's present. Now, the government in the north, if you want to address any of the social and economic issues, you must have resources. There is this, in my opinion, considerable, what do you call it in English, a misunderstanding about the actual richness of the South. Yes, potentially, it's an exceptionally rich country. It has probably the best land on the globe, probably, the South. The basin of the White Nile is uniquely rich. You can sell that soil for gold today. So, and people will be buying it very, very heavy. But the point is that it is grossly underdeveloped. It's extremely backward. We are talking literally in some areas, and my brothers from the south would stop me if I'm misinforming you. We're talking about people living literally in stone age sometimes. If you go to places around Boma, if you go between Boma and Pibor, you'll find such places. They are very, very underdeveloped, very basic. The country doesn't have formal economy at all. That's a fact. There's no industry. Agriculture is totally localized. The main resources are coming to the capital and main cities from outside, mostly Uganda, Kenya. They are delivered, imported. Whatever is produced locally is barely sufficient for self-sustenance. Barely sufficient. And that is a very serious impediment for any sound policy addressing the problem of the IDPs, in humanitarian, in political terms, whatever. Now, we also have to admit, and the president of the South has made a number of statements and decisions recently to that effect, that the new government is weak, inexperienced, and it's very prone to corruption. The recent, firing, suspension, the right word, of the two very senior ministers in the government just says it again, because they were suspended because they used in an unauthorized manner $7 million to buy safe boxes for the government. Obviously, the country which is now in the particular austerity program because of the suspension of oil exports, to spend money on protecting cash creates very, very serious moral questions. But the point is that this money were disbursed without proper authorization from the presidency. The president just suspended them and does the investigation. So this is an important element of understanding the reality on the ground. If the senior government officials are engaged more in self-embezzlement and things like that, then you cannot expect them to prioritize the issue of the IDPs as an important one. Now, another thing which is important, I guess, when understanding whether we can talk about serious peace building in the South, is the fact that, and ability of the South to actually deliver on that, is its transient status in understanding its national interests and winning its place in the system of international relations. It's a process, it's not their fault, but this is the fact that the Southern Sudan is yet to establish relations, sound relations with its neighbors. It's yet to understand how it can benefit from international multilateral diplomatic and economic relationship and things like that. Again, there's a problem of capacity, but there's also a problem of political philosophy in terms of defining it. So that I think needs to be also put into the right context when talking about the potential for peace building in the South. So what I would like to say is then in conclusion here, this element in brief, when we explore the IDP-related matters here at this symposium, we probably should accept, at least I suggest, we accept as a working assumption that the traditional paradigm of understanding and dealing with the humanitarian situation in the Sudan needs to be reassessed, needs to be reevaluated. It has to be reviewed against the new historic background and against this fast-changing international and national environment. I think it would help us then to discuss in more practical, more durable terms the prospects for resolving the crisis of the IDPs. When preparing for this symposium, I kind of drafted a political wish list as to what needs to be done in order to make sure that the changes will take place that would lead to considerable improvement of the situation regarding the IDPs. Since we will have yet a technical working group discussion on some very practical matters in this regard, I would limit myself for a couple of minutes only to speaking about what I believe all practitioners dealing with the humanitarian emergency in the north and humanitarian emergency in the south should have in mind when developing their policies, when building their policies on certain assumptions and aspirations. I think a very important for the north, in the north, a very important thing to understand is that the ruling elites in Khartoum through generations were governing the country through the host of measures and methods which created an entrenched and continuing marginalization of the country's periphery. And talking about periphery, I mean all of the country. Now when the south is gone, the periphery is still there. Darfur is still there, it's a periphery. Abyei is still there, it's a periphery. South Kordofan, Brunei still remains there, Eastern Sudan remains there, it's a periphery. And this trend continues to exist as if nothing has happened, you know. As soon as the CPA was over, even not before it was over, Khartoum again tried to use exactly the same methodology in order to deal with the situation in Abyei. It basically provoked very much the SPLM North to resume its military activities in the Nuba Mountains, and obviously, definitely provoked the resumption of hostilities in Blue Nile, if you know exactly what has happened in September 2011. So the methodology, the approach of the North, of the leadership in the North has not changed. For them, this is still a periphery. It still should be marginalized through violent means. It has to be deprived of all basic resources and so on and so forth. And whatever is happening to the people, it's none of our business. They are our potential and actual enemies, and therefore they should suffer. That's something that I believe we need to be aware of when dealing with policies and projects regarding the Sudan. This would imply, and that's where I'm totally with Professor Matthews, would imply that in order to change this trend, to change this reality of continuous and entrenched marginalization, we need to be prepared for a generational change. The politicians, the political class today in Khartoum is organically unable to change the strategy. It perceives the periphery as it did perceive the South from a very narrow, I would say sometimes surprisingly outdated, racist perspective. For the political elite in the North, the people living on the periphery are definitely people of a different human category. And the whole mentality is built on that assumption. To change that, you have to change the brains. And that is not yet possible, as you know, medically or otherwise. So while dealing with this challenge of humanitarian emergency in the South and trying to develop, programs and projects, we must be aware of it. It's going to meet again very, very familiar difficulties. Those of us who have been in the South and know what does it mean to go to hack the Humanitarian Affairs Commission to receive a permit to fly to a certain place where there is a conflict would understand me. It takes sometimes weeks, although all of them know you. They greet you, they give you tea, you sit with them, they tell you you're going to get it tomorrow. You're not going to get it tomorrow, that's for sure. You're going to get it in a couple of weeks, and only when there will be a political decision to allow you to travel. That hasn't changed much. It has changed a little bit because of the considerable presence of the United Nations, first through armies and then now through the existence of UNAMID, the mission on the border between North and South, which is called UNISMA. So that's one thing that I believe we need to be aware of. I'm not talking here, and I will save this very important part for our discussion in the panel as to what needs to be done in order to address this serious problem. I would also like to stress that when dealing with the North and talking about peace building, we also need to be aware of the fact that the real problem in the North, I've said it already in a way, but it's better to accentuate it. The real problem in the North is the NCP, the National Congress Party, the ruling party. That's the real problem. Because as a political entity and a conglomerate of economic and military and ideological and spiritual group, it's a very complex phenomenon, the National Congress Party. It is not prepared to make any serious strategic moves to change its approach to the IDP's issue. It sticks to the same set of racist perceptions regarding the Africans. Muslims or non-Muslims, people in Darfur are mostly Muslims of African origin. But we know how they were treated by the government. The same is true about the Nobagi. The same is true about Blue Nile people, Tunj and others. So, to be realistic again, the hopes that the National Congress Party and the associated political class would adopt a policy of moderate, albeit incremental, democratic reform did not materialize. There were different efforts, different kind of moves in order to help people in the NCP, including the president, including the first right president, including individuals like Nafi Ali Nafi, who is a leading member of the NCP. To explain to them, it was done by Mr. Pront, by Mr. Menkerios, by Jan Eliasson, by President Mbeki, President Abubakar, President Buyoya, to tell them that it's a different time outside, that you have to change your attitude, that you have to seize the opportunity that was provided to you by the CPA to actually establish a relationship, a political dispensation which will integrate the interests and the opinion of the people in the periphery in order to make your state more stable and your country, your economy in particular, more sustainable. It all fell on deaf ears. And I think I would also have to say a word briefly on the opposition in the north, because the humanitarian community deals with both the government official authorities and the rebel authorities on the ground. It has been the practice since Operation Lifeline Sudan. It remains to be the practice now in the north. The opposition in the north obviously is extremely diverse. In January 2013, in Kampala, they signed a new document. Who is interested, I can share it with you. It's called the New Dawn Charter, a document, fairly lengthy document, which is their political program of action. It unites SPLM North. It unites the opposition forces in Darfur, including, for the first time since quite some time, JEM, Justice and Equality Movement, and SLM, Sudan Liberation Movement, both groupings led by Mini Minawi and Abdul Wahid al-Nur, and a host of other parties, PCP of Turabi, Communist Party, Free Trade Unions Association, the Journalists Association, which is kind of a splinter from the traditional one, and a number of individuals. The document, when you read it, is also very much a wish list. But I think it's nothing but an effort to justify the establishment of such an alliance, political alliance, in order to make sure that there is some measure of unity among the opposition vis-à-vis the NCP. It is ultimately an anti-NCP for alliance. That's what it is. Anything related to NCP that creates negative reaction from the opponents, anybody is there. I am skeptical about this new alliance in terms of its capacity to introduce change, to apply sufficient pressure, to bring in sufficient heat on the NCP to cause change of heart and to cause change of strategy regarding the situation in the north, including on the issue of humanitarian matters. So why I can, because of the time constraints, I wouldn't like to elaborate it, but I believe it's something, and it's an alliance which is, for instance, weaker than National Democratic Alliance has been, which was created in 1995 in Asmara, in Eritrea, which included the entire SPLM, which included all of the political parties, including, say, Democratic Unionist Party of the Mirgani's family, clan, and it doesn't have the same kind of regional support as NDA has had. It had very considerable regional support, to the point when the CPA was signed in January 2005. The remaining members of the NDA, without the SPLM, were forced to sign what is known as Cairo Agreement at the time. I'm not going to criticize that agreement or the whole process, because it has been sufficiently criticized. But the fact is that the Khartoum recognized the significance, political weight of the remaining part of the NDA with the departure of the SPLM from it. And significantly, NDA has a charismatic leader who unfortunately is not any longer with us, Dr. John Garang. NDS doesn't have either of this. And therefore I think it's not as going to be as influential as NDA has been. So having said all this, I think I will need to stop because of the time given to the presenters, and simply to stress that there may be also, and I think we need to do it hopefully today, assess also the ability of the international community to influence the political behavior of the two governments, and through what means and how it can be achieved, in order to make sure that whatever resources, whatever political will is there in the international community to provide assistance to the affected populations, both north and south, it actually reaches it, and it reaches it as soon as possible, as fast as possible. And these resources are used to the benefit of the people who actually suffer and need this assistance literally now, as we speak.